if you work in sports, if you work on what I call the business side of sports, you're very excited about the fact that gambling is now legal, because it's a way to get the fans to engage at a deeper level than they did before. And if again, when you work on the business side of sports, one of your number one objectives is to increase fan engagement, because as the fan engagement increases, you're going to buy more licensed merchandise, you're going to go to the games, there's revenue opportunities for the team. So when you work on the business side of sports, you're always trying to find ways to engage your fan.
Well, if you've consumed any amount of any form of media in the past few years, then it's likely, I'm guessing, that you've noticed that sports betting has been on the rise. In fact, you might even say that sports betting is on the edge of becoming ubiquitous. But how should Christians think about it? How should we think biblically and Christianly about sports betting? Is it something to avoid, or is it more of a gray area? Is it a matter for Christian liberty and for each follower of Jesus to determine based on their own conscience? I'm Paul Brandis, campus pastor at the Shawnee campus.
And I'm Bill Gorman, campus pastor at Brookside. In this episode, Dr. Darin White joins us to discuss the topic of sports betting and the Christian.
Yeah, Dr. White is the executive director of the Center for Sports Analytics, and he's a professor of marketing at Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama. He has a wide range of expertise in the world of sports business and is the author of a really helpful Gospel Coalition article on this topic of sports betting.
And what I found to be so helpful in our conversation with Dr. White is that he approaches this topic with a great deal of pastoral nuance and wisdom. So let's join in now.
Well, Darin, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us on the theFormed.life podcast today.
Excited to be with you guys and meet you and chat about sports.
Yeah. We have already had, before we logged on to record, just an awesome pre-conversation. And a lot of it was just more broadly about sports and what you get to do at Samford University. And I played basketball this morning and enjoyed doing that, running around with some friends of mine. And so we believe in the goodness of sports. But even more specifically, we're here today to talk with you about sports betting, which is, just would love for you to share a bit of like the state of the union of sports betting, because it has been surging in popularity over the past few years especially, and it's only illegal in a handful of states, and so the legality of it is increasing and increasing and increasing. And so would love for you to share some stats on that, and then even some of your thoughts on why that is true. I mean, obviously as something is legalized, it's going to increase, but it feels almost ubiquitous at this point, sports betting. And so why has that happened? And then, what is a bit of the state of the union as you know it to be?
Yeah.
Thanks.
So everything changed in 2018. 2018 was when the Supreme Court basically legalized sports betting. Before that, you could not legally bet on sports in our country. Now, that's not to say that there wasn't many, many billions of dollars wagered every year, but like my state, they used to estimate that Alabama was the second most, had the second most behind Nevada in terms of illegal betting. But I don't know how in the world they came up with those numbers, but that's what they used to say.
Yes.
But as of 2018, it is now legal to bet on sports in our country. And so what's happened now is it's a state by state decision. Right, each state has to decide. And so each state has been there's been legislation that's been passed in 38 of the states, as well as Washington, D.C. So 38 states. 2 came online this year. It was North Carolina, and I believe it was Vermont was the second one. But they just made it legal. And then even the 12 states where it's not legal, there's attempts being made. And for example, my state in Alabama, it was on the docket this year, came very close to getting, but it didn't quite make it. So that's kind of where we are. Interestingly, 2 of the biggest states, Texas and California, still not legal in neither one of those states. That represents about 21% of our country. So there's still a big chunk of the country where it isn't. But The state where you have the most sports gambling is actually New York, not surprisingly.
Yeah,
And
that makes sense.
you look at the top 10, it's New York, it's Massachusetts, it's Pennsylvania. It's mainly states up there in the Northeast. Only one southern state, and that's Tennessee, makes the top 10 in terms of sports betting. So that's some of the places and kind of how we got to where we are. So
is that, you think, primarily just due to population density? That there's just more people in that Northeast area than other parts of the country, or are there other factors that make that so high?
Yeah, it's probably population density for sure. There's also a direct correlation with church attendance and how many people, whether or not you're willing to engage in sports, which is kind of what we're talking about today, I think. There's definitely a correlation there. So if you look at states, you'll find that as church attendance goes up, the amount of sports gambling actually kind of declines. It's kind of a reverse correlation there, but the numbers are incredible. I mean, it's it's in the billions, many billions of dollars, and it's growing. As you mentioned, we've had 13 consecutive quarters of year over year growth. And I mean, like for example, Q1 of this year of 2024 compared to Q1 of 2023, we saw a 23% increase in the amount of sports gambling that occurred in our country as compared to year before. Wow. And while that is helped some by the fact that we're bringing new states online, it's still it's becoming more, as you mentioned, just more socially acceptable. It's easier to do than ever before with with these things right here,
Right. Smartphones.
Teams and organizations have embraced it big time. I mean, pro sports have, and again, you go back 10 years ago and all your commissioners and everybody's like, don't do it. You're going to ruin sports. Now the message is completely opposite.
Right.
It's and so you're getting a lot more advertising, and it's just becoming more socially acceptable.
You made the point about the ease. Even organizations like ESPN, are now running ESPN Bet is a sports book that has come online in the last 6 to 12 months. So Darren, any other thoughts that you would have on the why behind the surge? And if not, that's okay, but I just want to give you another chance to, as you've reflected on the surge, what would be some other potential contributors?
Yeah. So one of if you work in sports, if you work on what I call the business side of sports, you're very excited about the fact that gambling is now legal, because it's a way to get the fans to engage at a deeper level than they did before. Sure. And when you work on the business side of sports, one of your number one objectives is to increase fan engagement, because as the fan engagement increases, you're going to buy more licensed merchandise, you're going to go to the games, there's revenue opportunities for the team. So when you work on the business side of sports, you're always trying to find ways to engage your fans. And there's more and more competition out there because there's so much great sport content, right? I mean, there's just you just think about it, like you could literally on your phone watch cricket in India or whatever, you name it, right? You can watch
the Premier League, the Premier League across the pond.
Sports is now global. Totally. And so if you're the Kansas City Chiefs and you're trying to attract eyeballs to your team and get your fans to care, and it's all about fan engagement. And so sports gambling offers us a new way as sports marketers to get our fans to engage in a deeper way with our team. And so that's why teams are so excited about it and why they're pushing it so much, and why a lot of teams nowadays will even have they'll have partnerships with different sports betting books like BetMGM or Caesar,
FanDuel
or DraftKings. I'm sorry, and they'll integrate that into the app. So I don't know about the Chiefs, but I know a number of NFL teams. If you download the actual official app, then the sports betting is within the app itself, right? And so all that to be said, it's just way easier than it ever has been before, and the teams are encouraging us to participate in sports gambling because it's just a win. It helps engage the fan at a deeper psychological level, and just increases the enjoyment level, really. So
well, and Darren, we're talking here primarily, at least we have been, about pro sports and sports betting. As we're recording this, the settlement from the NCAA and the ability to pay players and that kind of thing is all unfolding. And I'm just curious about the impact of this on the sort of the college sports, or I guess I don't know if you can call it amateur anymore in some of these places, but this other kind of non-pro sports in the sense that we're talking here. If that has any impact in this conversation, as you've thought about it. I know it's relatively fresh news, but I know it's been coming for a while. So
well, and people bet on college sports already, right? So but how would that potentially change that? Or and the NIL stuff that came a couple of years ago for college sports, it's an ever-changing landscape, probably post 2018, and all of this kind of gets mushed together a little bit. So your thoughts on the college sports part of it?
Yeah, I mean, of course, college sports it's just transforming right before our very eyes, right? With the settlement, that just came down, and then the conversations about schools being allowed to directly pay athletes,
which isn't different.
I think they're saying up to $22 million, and yet most schools' entire athletic budget isn't even $22 million.
Right.
So it's we're watching college sports just transform before our eyes. And where is this going to end? I don't know. I mean, that's a question I could ask a lot, actually. But my guess, I'll a little bit off topic here, but my guess is, if you want to look at the way Europe is set up when it comes to the tiered system, the pyramid system, when it comes to European football, and the way that the teams at the top of the pyramid will bring players in and then put them on loan at lower level teams. And I would not be surprised if 5 to 10 years from now, we don't see a similar model evolve in college sports. But we'll see. Who knows? We'll see what happens. But how does that impact sports betting? I don't know. It's a good question. It's more and more college sports are becoming a business.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. And people, you think about just 10 years ago, you wouldn't think about college sports as a business. Typically, college sports were like the athletic director, the person who's responsible for running the athletic department. Historically, that's been a coach. Like a former coach would become the athletic director, right? And then they would run the athletic department like a coach would run an athletic department, right?
Yes.
And not like a business person would run the athletic department. Nowadays, what you're starting to see is more and more of particularly your Power 5 or Power 4, I guess now, schools are hiring business individuals to come in and run the athletic department, and they're running them like businesses. And so, and I mean, I just
maximize profits. Maximize profits.
Yeah, that's where we're at. And so, I just had a conversation last week with a major Power 5 school who is, they're looking at putting in a very large investment, and they're wanting to know how can they monetize the data that they're going to be collecting from fans at sporting event. And that's 10 years ago, you never had that conversation.
Right.
And so as you know, I run a program at Samford in sports business. It's in our business school, and my students, when they graduate, they go out and that's where they go. Well, most of my students have gone to work in pro sports until the last few years. Now, within the last few years, more and more they're going to Power 5 schools, and they're getting hired, in athletic departments, because they're starting to hire business trained individuals. So all of that to say, that all ties back into the sports betting piece.
Yes, it does.
Sports betting again is from the standpoint of a sports marketer, it's a lever that can engage that fan in a deeper level, and ultimately that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to drive deeper fan passion. We want to keep our fans engaged with our team 365 days a year, right? That's the goal. And we don't want you to watch the Kansas City Chiefs until the Super Bowl's over and then forget about them. We want to keep you. We want to keep you thinking about the Chiefs 365 days a year. And sports gambling is one of the ways that we now, as a tool, we have to be able to achieve that. So,
yeah, that's really helpful, Darren, is that metaphor of that. That's a lever we have to pull. And I'm curious, as you've thought about this as a Christian,
right,
in this world, is that a lever that is wise for Christians to pull? I mean, to engage in, to say, as you're thinking about this from a biblical worldview and from a theological standpoint, is this kind of an area of kind of Christian freedom of conscience? Is there more nuance that needs to be involved there? I'm just curious, how would you encourage Christians to think about engaging or not engaging in sports betting?
Yeah. So where I come down, and I have given this a lot of thought, as you might guess. And where I come down on it is, it's not a hardcore "thou shalt not." but you need to be really, really cautious. In a lot of ways, it's similar to alcohol. Alcohol is something that can lead to great devastation, and there's so many examples of that, right? But when done in moderation and when done, in the proper context, I think it falls under the heading of grace, if you will. And it's going to be each individual Christian's got to kind of make that decision and think about that. But there's a big difference between, in my mind, drinking a glass of wine at dinner versus going out to the bar and drinking 7 beers and stumbling all over everywhere or whatever, right? That's a huge difference right there, right?
Right.
Same thing with sports gambling. There's a big difference between, the 3 of us going out, and we're going to play golf and let's bet $1 on this next hole, and that just amps up the level of enjoyment for all 3 of us, because now we got $1 riding on this thing, right? So, or maybe it's the fantasy, let's pick the March Madness basketball tournament, and the winner is going to get a lunch or something like that. That's one thing versus hardcore sports gambling where it dominates your life. And there are so many examples of that, right? Of people that just crash and burn their life. There's a ton of negative things that can happen. So it's somewhere in there would be my answer. That's how I look at it anyway.
Well, and we'll link to the article in the show notes, but you co-wrote for the Gospel Coalition on this topic. And one of the parts of that article that I really appreciated was in this sense of what is meaningful work. And that really is a big part of our DNA. We love the Dorothy Sayers quote that the only Christian work is good work well done. And so we've got a strong category. In fact, theFormed.life is about really helping people connect Sunday faith to Monday work, and defining work not just as a job or an occupation, but meaningful contribution, whether it's compensated or not. And so in that sports betting article, you and your co-author sort of tease that out, that betting has more of a, and I'll let you kind of name it here, but more of a passive engagement, right? There's money put in, but then there's no sense of contribution to the outcome. Am I representing your kind of that article fairly?
Yeah.
Anything more you'd say about that part of it?
We talk about work versus investing versus gambling. Like we've kind of pulled those 3.
Yes. Yeah.
And
if you could talk through that a little bit, that'd be great.
Yeah. So work, is, again, if you look at the Garden of Eden narrative, right, in Genesis, work it's redemptive, it's creative, it's taking the garden, if you will, and it's expanding its bounds, right? That's what God's called us to do as image bearers, is to, in essence, expand the garden, is to bring order to the chaos, right? Because that's the God we serve. We serve a God who took disorder and he created order out of that, and that's what we should be agents of that within our world. So when we work, that's what we're doing. We're the places we go, we should leave them better than they were before. Right? There's value achieved because we were there and we did what God's called us to do. Right? That's a big picture idea thought of work. Well, that's not gambling. Gambling is not in any way create value in that way. So that's kind of first. Second would be that, is it investing? Because a lot of people are like, oh, it's just like investing. It's just like putting money in the stock market. Well, let's think about that. When you're putting money into the stock market, you're basically taking resources and you're giving them to a company, which is people who are going to go out and do what? Create value. Do something that's going to hopefully help with human flourishing. In other words, humans will flourish more because I gave money to, I don't know, to Whoop. Okay, this is a company I love.
Oh, yes.
You ever heard of Whoop?
I've got a buddy who loves that.
I love my Whoop.
Yes. Man, my friend will be very excited that you mentioned it.
This is our unpaid ad.
So I love Whoop, but Whoop's a company out of Boston. And, this thing's unbelievable. It's a whole another conversation for another day, but the kind of data that this thing provides absolutely helps with human flourishing. Like, I'm sleeping better now because I have a Whoop on my arm, so I'm flourishing. Well, if I'm investing in Whoop, I'm in essence investing in human flourishing, right? So in both cases, investing or work, we're doing what God's called us to do as image bearers. We're really advancing the garden. we're expanding the garden, if you will. Gambling doesn't do that. Gambling is a zero-sum game. Gambling is where, in other words, if I put $100 up, I'm either, there's no value gained from it. It's either someone's going to win and someone's going to lose. And it's so it's just basically a way of exchanging money without any value really being created. And so it's really important to kind of understand that it's not work and it's definitely not investing. And so,
So the Christian liberty around it would come in more, and please, nuance this, would come in more from a standpoint of like the big bucket categories of like work, but then rest and recreation in the midst of that. And there would be sort of intemperance, in moderation, to increase enjoyment. There would be potentially some Christian liberty. Am I framing that in a way?
100%.
Yes.
Okay. At the end of the day, it all boils down to what's going on in your heart. When if I'm gonna go on my phone right now and make a $5 bet on, I'm gonna watch the Atlanta Braves play tonight. Okay. And if I make a bet on whether or not my favorite player is going to get a home run during the game, because I could do that. I could go in and do that. What's going on in my heart? If there in some way this is selfishness that's coming out, which is of course what we're all tend towards, then that's when you move over into the realm of it being sinfulness and brokenness, right? And it's that's versus if we're betting some amount and it's really just for enjoyment. Here's a good way to think about it. If I bet, let's say I bet $100 on whether or not my favorite player is going to hit a home run tonight or not, and he does it. If I lose sleep over that, now something's wrong in my heart, right?
Yeah.
In other words, you've got to be able to, So that I don't know if that.
No, that's great. And the other piece, because you mentioned an example like the three of us golfing, and that's one of the other pieces of this that I've wondered about is like a community building aspect. So like a relational growth. So the example I put in the document that we prepared was I've participated in fantasy sport leagues, not daily fantasy, but like season-long fantasy. Daily fantasy has exploded in the last few years as a version, I think, of more sports betting. But even a season-long fantasy league that I've done with friends for 20 years, if we have a buy-in at the beginning of the season, that's a form of sports betting in a way. And it's very, I actually got out of a league with my high school buddies because they were making way more money than me and they kept raising the buy-in. I was like, guys, I'm a pastor. Like, I love you all, but I cannot afford. And they were all like, should we double the buy-in this year? No big deal, right? I'm like, I cannot do that. So I got out of that league, but I've been in the league, fantasy football league, for almost 20 years, and the buy-in's never gone above $25 for the entire season. And it increases the communal and relational enjoyment of that activity. But again, within moderation, temperance, and I've never lost sleep over it, even though I haven't won very much. So I don't know if that is a part of this as well.
In that case, you got a little bit of skin in the game.
I know. I've thought about that too.
And they say there's no such thing as a free lunch. And it's
right.
It's just how we're wired as human beings. We put value on things that we have some sort of stake in it, some sort.
Yep.
And in this case, the stake is very small, but it's still it's enough to move us from being just completely apathetic about it to being like, okay, I kind of care about this now a little bit, And so and that's good. You get a group of people together and you all kind of care about it where you wouldn't maybe before. And as a result of that, it creates, again, that relational dynamic, that opportunity to create friendships, just opportunity to have fun. I mean, that's a gift from God, is,
yes, it is.
For us just to be able to enjoy one another. And, and that's, the next question, is there going to be sports in heaven? Definitely going to be sports.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes.
Competition is a good thing. It's
yes.
And it's people all the time like, no way, there's no way. I was like, yeah, of course there will be.
100%. And I just can't imagine sports without blown calls.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. I don't know how that all works, but I'm excited to play basketball in heaven for sure. For sure. So.
I'm curious for the two of you. You both were so enthusiastic. Of course, there's going to be sports in New Heavens, New Earth. I don't disagree, but I'd love to hear you articulate why you both are so convinced of that.
I'll let Darren go first. Yeah.
Yep. I just think people would be interested to hear that. What's the case that you would make other than that you love it and you want it to be?
We love it, so it'll be there.
Yeah. I mean, again, God's the one who made us competitive. That's part. So, I mean, there are some people out there, I guess, that aren't competitive, but most people I know have a competitive nature about them. And so as a result, we like to find ways we get joy when we're able to exercise that characteristic about ourselves. When we're able to putting yourself into a competitive situation and being able to test yourself against someone else is just, it's awesome. It's really an amazing, I mean, again, it's God that put that desire in us, I think. And it doesn't, unfortunately, again, it turns into, because of our broken nature, it turns into a zero-sum game where I win, you lose, or vice versa. And it's, but yet, as a follower of Christ, it's actually, you can believe it or not, I know it's hard to believe, but again, I coached college soccer for over a decade. Okay. So remember that you can actually do everything in your power as a coach and as a player to do everything possible to try to win a match. And in the end, if you don't, still be completely satisfied and happy for the other team.
Yes.
That's absolutely possible. You
Yep,
you can actually do that. And it's an amazing thing when you can do that, when you can strive and strive and strive and strive to win, but be completely content and okay if you don't, and be happy for the other guy when he wins. And so, yeah, I mean, no doubt. I mean, that's something that we'll get to continue to experience that, I think, in the new heaven and new earth. But love to hear your perspective, Paul.
Well, I couldn't agree more with that. And I think the other piece I'd add, or maybe I'd build out, because I think you're rooting some of that, even like healthy, good competitiveness within our image bearing. And I think we could add to that list of the number of things that get to happen in sports that directly connect back to who God is and then how he's designed us as image bearers. So the first one that came to mind for me, I love actually the redemptive competitive idea. But the first one that came to mind for me is actually creativity, like creativity within sports. Soccer, football is referred to as the beautiful game because it's this sort of like unparalleled. And soccer's not even close to my favorite sport, but even like I can recognize like, whoa, there is divine image bearing creativity that's happening in this sport right now that is unlike anything else. And I think, in some of it is the famous Eric Lindell, right? Who, when I run, I feel God's pleasure. Mm-hmm. Right. And so it's this like deep, like fittedness. And so I think there's just that'll continue, but only be better, which there's a lot of brokenness within sports as well. And so I'm delighted to experience all the goodness of sports in the new heavens and earth, if Darren and I are right, but with none of the brokenness. It's kind of stunning. So
I recently read a book by Jeremy Begbie, who's a theologian I think he's at Duke, but he wrote a book called Redeeming Transcendence in the Arts. And he actually transformed the way, it was an offhand comment in this book, but I think about dance.
Oh, sure.
And, he was talking about the ways that different art forms can, point to transcendence. And this was kind of a side comment he was kind of talking primarily in visual arts and painting and this kind of thing, but he talked about dance as pointing to like kind of the liberated body of a new creation bodies. Yes. And I wonder if there's a bit of that in sports as you see, 100%. Michael Jordan dunk a basketball, if you're getting a glimpse of what like a redeemed human, it's not fully there, but you watch an amazing ballet or you watch Michael Jordan or
Messi on the soccer field or Mahomes. Yeah, Mahomes throw.
When you watch Messi play, and again, you do need to have a relatively high soccer IQ, but if you really understand the game, and he does things, and you're just like, how? Yeah. How in the world? And it's
poetry in motion.
It really,
it's poetry and beauty and creativity in motion. And again, it's saying that as someone that soccer's not my favorite, but it's like it still is like it is incredible. Yeah. And so I think that'll only continue, and I'm really delighted by that.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
It's amazing.
And by the way,
I
I was
want,
going to say, let me tie right back into our sport betting.
yeah, please.
And so in some ways, as a fan, you think about it as a fan, you have a very neutral role to play as you're watching a sporting event, right? Other than maybe just the psychological commitment that you got the team. But once you've engaged now with some form of betting, you've now you've got a little bit more on the line, if you will. So it gives you the opportunity to maybe enjoy that sport at a little deeper level possibly than you could if you're just watching it through the eyes of just as a fan, per se. So it's the thought.
Yeah. Well, and it seems to me that we're positioning this conversation in the realm of, you talked about work and rest in leisure. And so the monetary element of that as well, like as you're thinking about your budget, if you've got $100 for your whole, life, and the portion of that budget that you're giving to leisure, whether that is you like to take, national park trips or go to a baseball game or
bet on a baseball game.
But like it seems like it ought to be proportional to what you're spending on leisure activity.
Yes.
Whatever you buy for leisure entertainment, going to the movies, going to a game, if the amount that you're starting to try to spend in sports betting, and you may have to make some trade-offs too.
Yes.
Am I going to buy, 2 hot dogs and 2 beers, or am I going to put a bet on this game? Because those dollars are probably competing in your budget, or should be, as you think about how much am I willing to spend in my sort of leisure enjoyment of this of the sports activity.
Yep. Well, and one of the other questions that I've been thinking about, Darren, is gambling broadly, whether sports gambling or in other forms, can be highly, highly addictive.
Yes.
In which your alcohol example is a nice parallel there.
Right.
So I wonder if you could share a little bit more about that. Like as one of the reasons to be very cautious, even as we have been broadly framing this as a matter of Christian liberty, but exercise extreme caution. I imagine that the addictive nature, it just feels great to win. I have won of that fantasy league a couple of times, and it feels great to do that. So maybe share a little bit more about that. And I wonder if you're even aware of any resources, and if not, it's okay. We didn't prep you on this question, but aware of any resources for someone who that's listening, that might raise their hand to say, oh, you know what, I actually might have a problem here. I might be addicted.
Yeah. And one way to sort of check as I mentioned, it's really a heart issue, and you've got to be very, very aware of where your heart is on sports gambling, on alcohol, on a lot of these things. And that's hard. We're notoriously bad about lying to ourselves, right?
Yeah, the prophet Jeremiah seems to say that. But the heart is deceitful above all things.
So, but with the help of the Holy Spirit and some prayer, you need to really do reflect, and maybe even if you're engaging in sports gambling, just promise yourself you're going to stop, for 3 months and see if you can. And if it's a problem, then you probably have a problem, and you probably need to think about that. But and so that's a big part of it. I know in Europe, they've been doing this a lot longer. They've had legalized sports gambling in Europe for much longer than we have. And so they actually, in Europe, it's part of their law. They advertise and put in their advertisements, different ways to help people who are addicted, to gambling and things like that. So it's that would be, and I will say, just from my own standpoint, I actually don't do any sports gambling. Personally, I don't, because I don't know. I just haven't gone there. I haven't needed to put a bet down on a game to increase my enjoyment of the game. Like when I watch the Braves tonight, I'm going to be all in all the way. I don't
no matter what,
$5 bet on whether or not somebody's going to get a home run or not to make me more engaged. I am fully engaged, now, but some people may not be that way. Some people may want to, but anyway, that's just I just thought I'd bring that up.
And as we think about the kind of the addictive component of gambling, I read not long ago, there's a book out called Dopamine Nation, which is just looking at dopamine in our minds and our brains and how that works and across many different things. Obviously, it's a key component in gambling addiction, whatever it is that you're betting on. But part of what she points out is that dopamine is a chemical of anticipation, even more than it is of satisfaction. So it's triggered in the anticipation of the need being, or that kind of craving being satisfied. So actually and which is why she said, and she didn't talk about sports gambling in particular, but more just kind of traditional casino gambling. Part of the reason it is so addictive is there's always that anticipation. When is the slot machine going to stop? Even when you lose, it keeps you coming back because the anticipation is actually where that dopamine release happens. It's at its most palpable right before you actually get the reward in the midst of that. And so I think all this is subject to the same kinds of things, whether you're betting in a casino or on a game. Yeah.
Well, and even like there's a double layering of like the anticipation and then the satisfaction if the bet comes in. But if you bet that on your team,
that's right.
That's like you're layering in like a double win in some ways. And people bet on teams that are not their own and players that are not their own. But I would actually be interested. I don't know how you'd get the data on this, but I would be you probably couldn't get the data, but I'd be fascinated to know how much of sports betting is on a team or a player that someone roots for as a fan.
Right.
It'd just be fascinating. I mean, you couldn't get the data on that, but it'd be really interesting to know if that's primarily what people are doing or if it's more, kind of open-ended than that. But it would be a double kind of effect.
I don't know if you should limit Darren. I mean, he's the data science guy. I mean, maybe he can design a study to get at that.
Like, we could probably figure that out. That's... I mean, we're definitely moving more in that direction because that's exactly
like the integration.
They're trying. Teams are trying to get us as fans to bet on the game itself to engage us more with our team. And so that's that's what teams are doing. So it's which again, to me that's a whole different process versus just randomly going out and going, okay, I got $1,000. I want to try to double it tonight. I'm going to bet on any. You got all these, these different sports betting websites and all these, sorts of things. And you're literally trying to grow, you're viewing it more like an investment. Like I'm going to take my money, I'm going to grow it. That's a whole different process in my mind compared, like even mentally what I'm doing in my heart is versus betting on the game I'm watching because I care about the game and I'm just wanting to engage in the game a little bit deeper, if you will. So,
yeah. Yeah. Well, and on the resources point, there are, and Darren, you're mentioning, I think even some of the sports books in the US have that. I've heard that on like podcast advertisements where they're listing off like, call this number or go to this website. So there are national resources of help for people that might be addicted, but always feel free to talk to your pastor as well if you're listening and find yourself in a spot where you're wondering. The other thought I had, Darren, when you were sharing about, I love the idea to like just stop for 3 months and see kind of what that does to your heart. But if you're not sure and you're wondering, just ask someone close to you. Ask your spouse, ask your closest friend, your roommate that knows that you engage in this activity. Ask them what they're seeing in your heart and life as you engage in this activity, and ask them to be honest, and then be ready and willing to listen to whatever they say. But you can always contact one of your pastors if you find yourself having a challenge in this area.
And I've walked with people through that before, this very thing. And so, we will be there for it. I think even the sense of wanting to keep something secret or not wanting others to know is also probably another good sign of maybe I'm in too deep on this, or kind of I don't want my spouse to know, or I wouldn't be comfortable with my friends knowing how much I'm putting on these games or how often I'm doing this, are all kind of they say signs of maybe there's something not right.
Yeah. No, if you're married, I would never ever think about making a bet without your spouse completely knowing about it. That would be
it's a good rule.
Yep.
I'm married 33 years, so that's one of my that would be a really bad idea.
Yeah. It's great.
Well, Darren, I wonder if you just have any final thoughts as we kind of come to a close here, just on this conversation. Anything that we haven't touched on that you think it would be really important for our listeners to hear or to think about in this conversation?
Yeah. Not really. I mean, just other than the fact that again, I'm a big Galatians guy. Love the book of Galatians. I love what Paul is all about in that book, about the fact that we are saved by grace, full stop, 100%. Let's not ever forget that. And yet as humans, we are so quickly want to add works to it. And so this is one of those areas where we could very easily set up in our minds, like, oh, I don't gamble, so I'm a better Christian than this person over here, right? Kind of thing. It can very easily become that, right? And yet, in fact, I just got through teaching through the book of Galatians at my church, and it's pretty shocking how worked up Paul is about.
Yes, he's angry a little bit.
Yes, I mean, he's just like, it is. It's grace, and that's really, really important as followers of Christ that we remember that we are saved. It is nothing that we had to do, nothing at all. It is totally by what Christ has done for us, and living in light of that, and then having the freedom to do the sport gambling thing in moderation, or alcohol in moderation, or whatever that looks like, that freedom that we get as a result of that. I think when you take sports gambling in light of the gospel of grace, you'll find that sweet spot. You'll find the place where it doesn't move into brokenness and into all of that. And so that's I think the key is that right there. It's just living in light day in, day out, preaching the gospel to yourself, remembering what God has done for us and who we are in Christ. And then through that lens, now let's talk about sports gambling.
Amen.
I mean, that's the key. It's really the key to anything, but it's crucial. You have to keep the grace equation in mind as you're, sorting through these kind of issues. And so,
I love that. I love the book of Galatians as well. Yeah,
so good.
It's a good one. So, well, as we wrap up, we always ask our guests one final question, just as a way to get to know them. And I'm, knowing a little bit of your bio, you've had the opportunity to work in a number of different kind of interesting spaces, and even like 2 jobs, but then they became kind of this other job, and coach and sports business. But if you could do something else, maybe than all of that, than the great work you've done in those areas, what's a job that you have kind of always wanted to have, or you've wondered about, or if you could do something else than the amazing work you already do? We always love to ask our guests that question.
That's a great question. If I could do something other than what I'm doing right now. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Which you seem really well suited for. So
I was gonna say, I love what I do right now. So I tell people all the time, I got the greatest job in the world. I'm raising up the next generation of sports business executives at Samford, and watching them go out and achieve great things, and kind of making dreams come true. And it's awesome. But I do say that from time to time, that one day, the day may come where I just am going to hang it all up, and I'm going to go back to coaching soccer, because I love coaching soccer. I love it. I love that competitiveness. I love, there's nothing like staying on the sideline and, working for hours and hours and hours, training your team and recruiting your players and strategizing, and, just all that goes into that, thinking about your opponent, and then going up against them and seeing, there's just nothing like that in life, like that right there. And winning a big soccer match or whatever. And so I've often said, if Manchester United or one of the England, if they ever wanted an American to come over and coach, I'm
like Ted Lasso,
Well,
yeah, that's awesome. Well, I have not done a lot of coaching, but my 9-year-old is doing flag football on Saturdays through the Lenexa Parks and Rec, and me and my assistant coach, we designed an incredible play that went for a touchdown, a 60-yard touchdown, and I was like, this is the greatest thing in the world. I turned, my assistant coach is an actual high school football coach. I'm like, what are you doing as my assistant? And I turned to him and I was like, dude, do you want to hire me? Like, I want to actually be a coach. It was so great. Yeah. Like on the sidelines, like the design, it was just so fun. So I really resonate with that answer.
Well, just imagine. So again, what we are doing at Samford is we're using data to actually, and so, to unpack. And so, like, for example, we just finished a project for a pro soccer team in Europe. We looked at 9,000 games of data from this one league, and we're able to come back and tell the coaching staff of this team, hey, if you want to get promoted to the next division, here are the 3 key things you need to focus on. So, like, one, for example, was counterattacks with shots on goal. And so you designs a whole strategy around all of that. You go out, you recruit, you train to it, and then they go out and they do it, and then they get promoted. And it's just like, I mean, there's just nothing better. I mean, it really is. It's just so much it's so much fun to test yourself in that way. And so that's, but yeah, so that's what we do. So yeah, so to all your listeners, if you have any high school students that want to one day be the next Billy Bean, you now know where to send them.
Yeah,
Awesome.
seriously. I
Yeah.
mean, the fact that you're doing that at a Christian college with biblical theological worldview is just, I mean, you kind of do have the best job in the world.
Yeah.
So that's amazing. So thank you so much, Darren, for your time today and for joining us. I'm really hopeful for the positive impact of this episode for our listeners. And to our listeners, thanks so much for tuning in and joining us on another episode of the Formed.life podcast.
All right, thanks.